Hello and welcome back to the ShefF1 podcast, where today we're going to be delving into some preview and prediction for the upcoming Miami Grand Prix this weekend. The one that no one has been waiting for, and one that will provide absolutely no entertainment after a pretty drab Saudi Arabian Grand Prix weekend. So nice and pessimistic to start off today's instalment to the podcast. Seb and Amy are with me as per usual, and we're going to delve into our predictions a little later in the episode. But first, let's address some of the big talking matters going into Miami this weekend. We've got Cadillac, the new team on the block for next year, supposedly announcing their driver lineup at some big events thing at the Miami Grand Prix weekend. Of course, all rumours have been flying around as to who they'll bring in to drive for them next year. The big names are Sergio Perez, Zhou Guanyu. I mean, Seb, if they were going to announce it this weekend, how surprised would you be, to see Sergio Perez back on the F1 grid for next year?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. I think it makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons for Perez as that experienced driver in the team. I mean, I think his reputation F1 has been tainted by his spell at Red Bull, at least the latter years at his time at Red Bull. But you can't forget before that there was a reason he signed for Red Bull. He was 2020 Sergio Perez. He finished fourth in the championship in a racing point. I know it was the pink Mercedes, but still, he is an incredible midfield driver, and having that experience and also the marketing and marketability that he brings to the team, to a new team who are going to be trying to, they need all the money they can get to catch up, make their facilities as good as possible, make sure they reach the budget cap, etc. Obviously, I know they are, backed by General Motors, so I don't think it's going to be too big of a problem, but I still think he's an experienced pair of hands. He brings in a big fan base to the sport, and that will already bring in a big fan base to the team, and I think that's quite a big point of it, is that yes, he brings in marketability in terms of sponsors, but in terms of fans for the team and maybe long-term fans, I think that's a good move. And yeah, he's a decent driver. Whether he can hit those levels that we saw of him when he was in the midfield, when he was younger, 5-6 years ago, it still remains to be seen. But if he can, then I think it's a really, really good pickup for them. Obviously, it's a little bit disappointing. I would have loved to see Valtteri Bottas back in F1 in that Cadillac, but still, I think it's a good appointment for Cadillac, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was Perez or Bottas to be that sort of experienced driver within the team. No one really suggesting that both were going to be signed, which is a shame because that would be a really, really nice sort of the unks are back in town kind of lineup for Cadillac. But yeah, no, I mean, with Perez, it's a case of, like, you're right, he is a top driver, and he wasn't, you were sort of scratching your eyes out a little bit towards the end of his time at Red Bull, but it wasn't a totally unsuccessful stint. And I think it sort of goes to show that he is one of those drivers that is just much better in the midfield. And then you brought up sort of the money, I suppose, issue there, because like you said, they are backed by General Motors. They're not a works team, hence why they're looking at Guanyu Zhou as their sort of other partner for Perez. Simply because he's also still in that Ferrari setup, as it were. Of course, Cadillac go to Ferrari engines. But Amy, I mean, do you think that move is a little bit unambitious for a new team with big expectations?
With Sergio Perez, I think that is more unambitious than Zhou Guanyu. I mean, Ferrari is a legendary team who still has this driver in their, I guess, setup. There's a driver there, and he was never able to prove himself in that stake. I mean, it was terrible. Obviously, he's shown in very few races, I guess, what he could do with it. But when he had the opportunity to, he did. So I feel like this is a great opportunity for him. He'll probably not be on the most money, so it's, I guess, money saved from Cadillac. So yeah, I think it's a pretty good move for them. But Zhou Guanyu, I think, has a lot to prove, and with a new team, new ambition, I think it's probably the best place for him to do it in. So I think it works two ways, and it's pretty strong. I do think there probably is more drivers that probably deserve more of a chance here than Perez and Zhou Guanyu, but I think the Zhou one's quite smart.
I mean, if you look at sort of Cadillac and the timing of how they've joined F1 for this new season, they have sort of just missed out on a load of amazing potential rookie stars. All the ones that a lot of the time were Ferrari driver academy members who have now all gone to IndyCar, where Cadillac you'd currently find them. And so it's just like, or closer to home at least. And so, drivers like Callum Ilott, Robert Schwartzman, Marcus Armstrong, and, even ones that were not associated with Ferrari, Christian Lundgaard, they all jumped ship to IndyCar in the last couple of years. all of them, I'd say, look to be quicker than Joe in the junior series. I was certainly more impressed by those names than Joe. I mean, of course, the sort of things of the past now, and Joe is a much more recent product, but I don't know, in terms of his time in F2, I just feel as though someone like a Drugovich would be a much better pick. Okay, yeah, sure, there's more politics there with Aston Martin. But Seb, I mean, are you in favour of this sort of... Would you go for Zhou Guanyu if you were Cadillac?
I think it is. I think Zhou's quite an ambitious move for them. I think, again, it seems like the financial reasons are quite important for Cadillac, clearly, because they're not two pay drivers, but they are two drivers who have got a lot of their opportunities in the sport because of the country they're from. And I think that obviously Zhou brings in a lot of backing from China, Perez from Mexico, and I think there could have been better options. I really like the way obviously Stake went about it and getting in Bortoleto, where, you know, he doesn't quite have that same marketability. Obviously, he's from Brazil, so he does have, you know, South American backing, but not quite to the same level. I think there were definitely other options that they could have gone for. Even maybe like a Colapinto. I'm sure if they tried hard enough, they would have probably been able to get him on their books. And as you said, Drugovich. There are other options out there, maybe a Colton Herta or something like that, just as something different. Yeah, I think it's safe, and I think it sort of shows that they're not expecting to come in and truly challenge at the top straight away. Because if they were, they wouldn't be looking for drivers like Zhou or Perez. They would be looking for a young, exciting prospect who they can potentially see as a world championship material. No one sees Zhou or Perez as winning a world championship. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right there, to be fair. I think it's a case of, if they really wanted to stamp their mark, they would have gone and pinched someone from another team, and we had a load of drivers out of contract for 2026. I think we still do have a lot of uncertainty as to who's going to be driving for which team. And so Cadillac could have swooped in and grabbed a really big name, someone like... Has anyone got anyone that's coming to mind that's running out of contract next year? I think George Russell. I mean, obviously that's a huge acquisition to make, and of course highly unlikely. But it does sort of represent their expectations going into 2026 and where they're going to find themselves within the field. I mean, I heard Pato O'Ward's name thrown about. You said Colton Herta earlier as well. Just, you know, when a new team comes into F1, you want to see something new. Something completely new. And so if we're getting Zhou Guanyu and Perez, don't get me wrong, not a bad driver lineup, but one that will be forgotten about within 2 years' time when they're both inevitably off the grid and better drivers have replaced them. So I don't know, maybe again it's a bit more pessimism to start off this episode, but I just feel as though Cadillac have let us down a bit here with this sort of new introduction by bringing in two pretty mundane drivers in terms of the excitement and the ability, but of course both bringing in a lot of money.
Yeah, I think I would also say potentially you look at, as you said, if they could have poached someone from one of the bigger teams. I think you even look at someone like an Isaac Hadjar. I think that they would be, if they tried hard enough, they would be able to get an Isaac Hadjar. Obviously, you look at Red Bull, I think they're going to have a situation where they are going to have to get rid of one of Lawson or Hadjar at the end of the season for Lindblad. So I think that they could have got that, or even a Sonoda. Like, I think if they tried hard enough, they could have got someone like that who has definitely more potential than Perez or Zhou, a little bit more unproven than Perez, but I think that they could have, if they really thought they were going to be competing at the top for 2026, they could have gone out and snapped up one of those people. But I think it does just show that they're expecting, when they come into the sport, they're not going to be competing right at the top end of the field, the sharp end, and I think that's understandable. So even though it's pessimistic, I think their signings, I think it's almost realistic of where they know they're going to be, and it is going to be sort of the back of the midfield, I think. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's just, you know, they are a brand new team. I don't think we can expect much more from them.
No, you're right, to be fair. I think it's a case of, if we keep expectations low, then maybe when Cadillac might bomb it next season, then, you know, it could be a little bit sort of easier to foresee that. But yeah, I mean, I think Perez is certainly the right pick of the two. If we just try and round it out now, Perez is certainly the right pick of the two. Just because, yeah, for that experience, as long as he returns to the team as that top midfield driver that really can elevate teams into a position where they shouldn't really be on track. But Amy, just one word answer if you can think of someone on the top of your head. Would you go with Guanyu Zhou, or would you go with someone else instead of him, or would you pick someone else instead of Perez?
I would pick someone else instead of Perez. I think Zhou Guanyu's not the worst option out of the two for me personally. But I do like what Seb said about Franco Colapinto. I guess that if they do want someone who's literally backed by a whole nation, a whole continent in that case, in Franco Colapinto's case, that would be a great option. And also, yeah, you could argue what's going on there is also probably the politics of it all, him coming from Alpine, but that would be a statement in itself to be able to get him. So I feel like that could have been an option. But for Perez, an experienced driver who's still wanting to show ambition, I mean, you've got someone like Valtteri Bottas, but that looks like the Audi move. But that would be someone who I'd want over Perez. I think Perez is just washed.
Fair enough. I mean, he's getting on a bit now as well. I mean, all I'm saying is, if this was 3 years earlier, this would be Antonio Giovinazzi's seat for the taking.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, this has him written all over it. And then Seb, who just two names just to round off this segment. Who would you pick to drive for Cadillac?
I would have gone all out to get Hadjar, and I would have got Perez as well.
Fair enough. Alrighty. Well, there's still plenty of time for Cadillac to maybe change their lineup if they have listened to what we've said, but I highly doubt that. Anyway, let's move on to something a bit closer to this weekend, and we have got Miami coming up, of course, but also in a couple of weeks' time, it could be Jack Doohan's last race in Formula One. Excuse me. There was recently an interview from one of Franco Colapinto's sponsors, some representative from that. And allegedly, he said, sort of off-camera kind of thing, someone could make out that he was saying that Colapinto will be making his debut at Imola, of course, the race after the Miami Grand Prix. I mean, Seb, you've been someone that sort of backed Jack Doohan pretty much till the end at this point this season. So what do you make of this move? Firstly, do you think it will happen? And secondly, how fair do you think this is on Jack Doohan?
I think it's hard to say whether it will happen or not. If I had to predict, I still don't think it's going to happen, even though obviously we've seen all the stuff about his debut being leaked. I think I wouldn't be surprised if that's like an FP1 session or something like that instead of actually the full-time seat. There had been rumours before that it was going to be Imola, so that does sort of back it up a little bit. But I still think that Alpine, I mean, before Saudi Arabia, they were saying that it was all coming out that, okay, he's done enough to stay in the seat till the summer break. I don't think that would have changed over one race. I know he wasn't great in Saudi Arabia, but he was also stiffed a little bit by the fact he did that one-stop strategy from, pitting on lap one with the safety car. And, it turned out to not be the optimal strategy. So, yeah, I think it's a difficult one because he does need to step it up, but he's also shown flashes that, if he can get consistency together, he is really quick. I've been so impressed with him in qualifying, especially. Obviously, Saudi Arabia qualifying still wasn't amazing, but before that, he had been pretty much consistently level with Gasly, and across the whole season, I think he's less than 3 tenths off him in average qualifying gap, and I think when you look at how good Pierre can sometimes be in qualifying, and you think of how big the gap was over Yuki in Yuki's first year in the sport, then I think you'd say, okay, well, Doohan, if he can, improve in a similar way to how Yuki stepped up across his time in F1, well, Jack Doohan could easily be a really good, solid midfield driver. So it feels a little bit unfair. I don't think it's going to quite happen this early, but I think unless Doohan, gets a really, really good result at all before the summer break, I think he will probably be gone by, I think the summer break could be is at the end of Jack Doohan's F1 career, and it obviously will be Colapinto that comes into that seat. Yeah,
unlikely that he'd return to the sport as well, I would say, simply because that this hasn't been an excellent first impression to make. I mean, teams like Cadillac would have considered drivers like Jack Doohan if maybe this sort of first stint would have gone a little bit better for him. I mean, the point you made there about if Colapinto making his debut would be at Imola in a practice session, that would be absolutely hilarious, I think. But Amy, what do you reckon? Do you think it could happen by Imola to see Jack Doohan gone?
I said Monaco. That was my prediction, that he'd be gone by Monaco. So by my standards, then yeah, I guess. I don't know how. I think it's going to be sooner rather than later with Jack Doohan. I do. I don't think he's done anything particularly wrong so far. He's literally just been a rookie in his first season of F1, trying to get the ultimate maximum amount of points. But I think they've had this presumption since the start of the season, and I feel like Flavio Briatore is not a man to go back on his word. And I think it's been said, and I think Franco Colapinto will be getting other options coming, crazy season, and will be moved elsewhere. And I think they'd rather get him in the team before that. So I think it'll be before silly season. I think it'll be before summer. So there's obviously a triple header: Imola, Monaco, and then Barcelona. So for me, you've got a fresh week in Canada, in Montreal, an isolated week, just a one race week, and I feel like that would be a perfect place to start him. So maybe after Barcelona, I think that's when we could see Jack Doohan out of that car.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's a case of I would say that the expectation being put on rookie drivers now is so high because we're seeing so many like incredible sort of short stints of performances despite not much experience from drivers like Liam Lawson when he first came into F1. You know, he was a breath of fresh air for I was going to say Toro Rosso for some reason, then I was going to say AlphaTauri. Realised that was wrong as well. It was AlphaTauri at the time though, so we'll call it that. But, you know, Franco Colapinto, when he came in for Williams as well, it was a really, really impressive stint for him. Nick De Vries, when he had that one-off at Monza for Williams as well. Ollie Behrman for Ferrari. Kimi Antonelli now. There's a lot of drivers that have been really, really impressive with very little time. But then as that sort of rookie season has developed a bit, you know, it has proven to be a bit harder than first expected for younger drivers who, of course, you know, I think very quickly that experience difference comes into play. I mean, are there any drivers that you can think of off the top of your heads right now who have made significant like leaps and bounds worth of progress in comparison to how they were driving when they first started in F1? Who has been given that time? If we put car performance aside, would you argue like Tsunoda has come on leaps and bounds since he first entered the sport?
Yeah, I think he was definitely the one that I would look at. And you say how far off he was from Gasly in 2021 in qualifying. I mean, it was a bigger gap than it was to Doohan. And I know Yuki was obviously rushed a little bit quicker through the junior series. And so I think you could say that might have come into play. But he was crashing basically. It felt like every week. He was obviously, it felt, he was quite immature when it came to the radio. And you look at his second season, he was far closer to Gasly. And he just come and leaped on bounds, it feels like, every single year. So he was given time, and there was talk in his first year that even mid-season that he could have been replaced, and let alone he said it himself that he felt he was lucky to even get a seat for 2022 at AlphaTauri. So I think he's definitely one. Other than that, I think it's sort of. I remember when it was Sargent, we were expecting his second year to kick on, and he didn't kick on. So I think it shows that both ways that you can. Maybe you just don't adapt to F1, and maybe that even though a lot of people have like a linear progression where, they just keep getting better and better with more experience. It doesn't always work with that, like that for every driver. So, yeah, I think you can look at it both ways for Doohan. He could, keep getting better with the experience, or this could just be, he is going to be an inconsistent driver with flashes of really good pace.
I would say Albon's another driver as well who has come on leaps and bounds since he came in. I mean, he's had a pretty, I would say, unique F1 career. Of course, that stint in Red Bull to begin with looked really promising, but then that full season didn't exactly live up to the hype that he had, following that early promotion. But then, since then, he's become a real staple at Williams, proper team leader in the last few years, wiping the floor with Logan Sargent, Nicholas Latifi. And he's had a bit of competition from Sainz now, but he's continuing to look like the stronger of the two, and he's just gone on to be a really, really solid driver, much more so than I think a lot of people would have expected a few years ago. But yeah, that's a short list of drivers who have genuinely been given the time to develop into something really, really great. And you're right, Seb, F1 isn't for every driver. I mean, you look back, this has been going on for a while. Drivers like Stoffel van Dorn comes to mind. He was so promising in his junior career and has gone on to do great things since leaving F1. Formula E World Championship in there. But his stint at McLaren was extremely forgettable. And so, yeah, I mean, Amy, were you going to say something there as well during all that, or?
No, they were literally the two drivers that came to mind. I mean, as well, you've got I feel like there could be a case for George Russell. Is someone who starts off, I guess, at a lower team and results at everything in F1. And everyone always knew he had a world championship mentality and could be future, but in a team where you are never getting into the points, and even though he's outdoing his teammate, it's hard to imagine a driver like that in a team like Mercedes. But it did feel like at the time it was a bit of a risk putting him in that Mercedes team, and it clearly is paying off, because look now, he's now the leader of that team at only 25 years old, 26. So, and he is definitely a future world champion in my opinion. So yeah, it's just taking a risk, I guess, on drivers as well, and I think he's quite an example of that.
I feel like Russell, I don't know, I think he was a safer bet. I mean, if you look at how he got on at Williams, I mean, he had a pretty terrible car for all the seasons he spent there. But, he out-qualified Robert Kubica in his debut season in every single race. And then, of course, Kubica got that 1 point at Hockenheim. So that isn't exactly an accurate representation of how that rivalry went down. Of course, he had Nicholas Latifi's number in basically every single race. He had that Mr. Saturday nickname, of course, put it P2 around Belgium in that crazy qualifying session, which then ended up being the race result. And I feel as though with Russell, he'd already built up enough memorable moments and enough criteria to prove
F2.
himself. And F2, of course.
And Sakir.
And Sakir,
yeah, well,
exactly.
obviously.
So I think there was so many auditions for George Russell, which he just absolutely smashed. And then little bit of an inconsistent time to begin with at Mercedes, making a few mistakes, building a bit of an interesting reputation. But he had Lewis Hamilton as his teammate, so and then. But
I think
if at the end, so I guess
I think if you look at a car, though, is the point here is like Alpine on exactly what Lawson was doing at Red Bull, and I don't think he's massively doing anything wrong compared to Gasly at the minute. I don't think the car is as terrible as it has been in recent times, but it's certainly not up there where he is expected to constantly be in the points every weekend, especially as a rookie. This is his 5th race. I think it's a lot of expectation, and especially when you've not got a car to fit that expectation, I think it's a bit harsh. It's like Oscar Piastri in his first season with McLaren at the start. He's an F2 champion. He's had all this potential, all that drama that went on. He comes into McLaren and they're not where they should be. And he's not comparing to Lando. I don't think that it's always on the driver to prove themselves. But I think because this has been such a set idea for Jack doing, that's the reason he's leaving, not because of his performances.
Yeah, I mean, it's a case of with being a rookie now, what is the approach do you go for in F1? Do you just drive as quickly as you can, not worry about, the effect that mistakes might have and, try and get some proper ridiculous results every so often? Or do you play it safe, be consistent, keep the car out of the wall as much as possible? I would go with the latter if I was any good at driving a race car, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really mean much what I'm saying here, but it was, I think it's a case of rookies just need to make sure they don't stand out too much by standing out by not being in the wall, if that makes sense. I mean, that's a lot of waffle there, but yeah.
No, I think it's a difficult one. I think you're seeing it a little bit with when you're comparing, say, Hadjar to, say, Bortoleto. I know, obviously, Hadjar's in a lot more competitive car, but it does feel like he's giving everything to get, those standout results. Whilst I think he has obviously been pretty consistent as well. Whereas Bortoleto, it feels like he's just consistently going about his business, not putting it in the wall. But I feel like now there's been a lot more hype about Hadjar because he's got those standout results. Whereas Bortoleto, even though he's doing an okay job and he's been consistent, I feel like Hadjar's stock is sort of almost rising ahead of Bortoleto's. Maybe it sort of was a little bit before anyway, but yeah, I don't know how you'd go about it, because you think of, say, Leclerc in his debut season, he was consistent, but there were still a few races where he was nowhere to be seen. But you think of those successive P7s, and that stood him out. So I think it's a difficult one to know whether you really, you try and go flat out and just don't have any fear, or you do just try and be consistent. I think for Dua now, I think he just has to go for it. I think because if he does get, a P8 or something like that, I think for now, just because he's trying to survive, that would be enough to keep him in his seat and allow him to make some more errors. I think it's a difficult one.
Mm-hmm. I think just leave the team in a lot of debt and cause some crashes if you're going to leave.
Yeah,
honestly.
That's true.
Leave it burning.
Yeah, we could do with some more entertainment on track, to be fair. So, Jack Doohan, if you do want to go on an absolute mad one in the next 2 weekends, then you're more than welcome to. Anyway, that's enough about that situation. Now, let's look a little bit more ahead to Miami. We've got Red Bull potentially bringing in a floor upgrade to try and close that gap to McLaren, but of course, with Miami being a sprint weekend, that does sort of leave their sort of judgment in doubt in terms of, will they have enough time to be able to get used to that floor upgrade as well. So we'll have to wait and see on how quick the Red Bull is this weekend. Could be a tricky race as well. There is rain forecast for Sunday, whilst also being extremely hot, so it could be a bit of a Singapore reboot over just in Miami this time. But in terms of Miami's track record, for those of you that might have not watched the Miami Grand Prix before, I will say first and foremost, I'm very, very jealous. More often than not, they have been been pretty bad since the track was introduced in 2022. But first, we'll do some predictions in a second. Let's just look at how we got on in Saudi Arabia, which again wasn't exactly a race to write home about, unfortunately. None of us got our pole position prediction correct, although Amy, you did have George Russell down as your start of quali, and that earned yourself the point again. Of course, putting it P3 for Mercedes, a decent showing for him, to say the least. You want to just talk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, it was no competition to your bottle letter when doing predictions. But, no, George Russell's clearly just been the stand-up. He's been the star of the season so far. I mean, it looked like he could have got pole at one point, but that's so hard when you've got Max Verstappen and a McLaren ahead of you. So, yeah, to be able to put it up there and fight with them in quali, I think he did a superb lap that was beyond the car. And yeah, I was quite happy when he did that lap, but obviously Oscar Piastri and Max Verstappen came in after, and yeah, I was happy that I put him a star.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, Seb, Lando Norris, your flop of quali, pretty good prediction there. Let's go through that one.
Yeah, obviously, it looked for a long time like he was, just delivering how we all expect him to in qualifying. Q1, Q2, absolutely comfortable, and Q3 puts it in the wheel. Absolutely lovely jubbly. That's what we love to see from a predictions point of view. I mean, I think it's a real shame for him because I think this weekend he showed real signs of being the quickest, and I think that it was, you maybe looked at the weekend before and it was, Piastri was well on top, but then this weekend it was, I think it looked like Norris's to lose. So yeah, I think that. And he did lose it, so it's I think a disappointing one for him, because he showed in the race he clearly had the pace to fight for the win.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, spot on, really. I mean, you put it in the wall, you're going to be flop of quali in Q3, of course. The less said about our podium predictions, the better, I would say. Seb and I picking up a point each for correctly guessing Piastri to win the race. Amy, you went with Lando Norris. I mean, without that mistake in Q3, could that have happened, or would Piastri have been too difficult to stop?
I mean, from the race point of view, Lando seemed like the quickest. I mean, he overtook a lot there. I just think, yeah, I do. I mean, it's hard to guess because I think the front runners have been so different racing this year. I mean, they're ahead by quite a bit, but there's always still someone quite close to them. I think Norris would have just been slightly faster and would have got rid of Verstappen a lot quicker than Piastri did. He was just naturally seemed a lot quicker on that track than Piastri, and that was shown all through FP1, FP2, FP3, and then quali. But for me, Lando Norris, I wanted him first because I thought he was going to get pole position, and I think he really would have, considering Oscar did come second to Max Verstappen. And it's actually the first time that Lando's crashed in a qualifying since 2021 Spa, which was that big incident. So yeah, sorry, I was going on about Lando Norris here, but
that was passion. That was passion right there. Okay, moving on to our driver of the day predictions for Saudi. Then Amy won the point for saying Lando Norris. I mean, it wasn't exactly the best crop to choose from. Seb said Lawson, I said Antonelli. Neither of whom really having a particularly exceptional drive. Antonelli once again finishing just behind George Russell, picking up some more decent points for him in what has proven to be an impressive rookie season. And then Liam Lawson, P12, so, not a terrible showing for him. Certainly signs of improvement, but I think it's safe to say that Norris takes the cake on that one. Seb, if you just want to briefly delve into Lawson's performance this weekend, though, and, try and justify a driver of the day pick if you can.
I'm not going to justify driver of the day, but I think he was okay. I think he was solid. I think that obviously you do look at it just on paper. He did start ahead of his teammate and finish behind him. I think Hajar clearly in the race had the better of the two of them. So I think that's obviously a little bit disappointing for Lawson. But it's all about, I think at this point of his career, at this point now, going back to V-Carb, he just needs to just get up to speed. And once he gets up to speed, gets comfortable with the car, because he didn't have a pre-season with them, didn't have the first couple of races with them, he just needs to get comfortable. And I think this was a good weekend for him to just get to grips once again with things and show a bit more promise and show that he can slowly start building up his performances to eventually hopefully get to the point where he was last year. It was an okay race. I mean, obviously he picked up a penalty as well, so I think he he could have. I think he might have finished P11 on track anyway. So and then just dropped back because of the penalty. So yeah, a little bit unlucky as well with the penalty. I think it was very, very harsh. But it was an okay showing from Lawson. I think on another day, maybe got a better start. He could have finished ahead of Hadjar. But yeah, it's a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly got plenty of security in that seat now. Another pretty sort of forgettable race weekend for him, yet absolutely no pressure being applied in the media. So I think Lawson lives to fight another day. Moving on to our moving on to our flop of the day predictions for Saudi Arabia. I pick up the point for Ollie Behrman, who, I mean, Amy said Verstappen, Seb said Leclerc, so that is basically just a gimme point, really, considering I said that Behrman wouldn't exactly have a terrible race weekend. It would just be a pretty forgettable one, hence why it would be a bit of a disappointment, considering his heroics there last year for Ferrari. Plenty of talk about Ollie Behrman going into this race, and it just didn't really provide anything to write home about. So, yeah, a bit of a de facto point for Behrman there, but yeah, again, not exactly a terrible weekend for him, finishing ahead of his teammate by a pretty sizable margin as well, although Seb, you did mention that Ocon was one of the drivers in the latter stages of the race to make an extra pit stop. Now, we have got our best team predictions here. I said Mercedes, Amy said McLaren, she won't win the point as there was no 1-2, and Seb said Alpine. I mean, do we want to just leave that blank? I'm happy to take no best team predictions this weekend, or...
It's difficult, because if it's going to be any, it's going to be you, Rudy, so
yeah.
I think it's up to you. It's up to you. If you want that point, I'm happy to give it to you.
Look, I mean, it's another run-of-the-mill Mercedes P5, P6. A solid weekend for them, to say the least, but it's pretty short. It's pretty clear here that their pace didn't exactly match the front-runners of Ferrari. Well, Leclerc specifically, Verstappen specifically for Red Bull, and they're still miles off that McLaren. So you know what? Considering it was such a run-of-the-mill weekend for Mercedes, I'll leave it blank, just because it could have quite easily been a McLaren 1-2 if it weren't for Norris's mistake in Q3. No shock prediction points, unfortunately, so we'll move on to our Miami predictions now. Let's start fresh with pole position. Seb, we'll start with you.
So sprint pole, I think we'll start with, and I'm going to go for Max Verstappen. So I think that just he's one of those drivers where he doesn't, even though it's been a little bit maybe the different case this season, that he has needed a little bit more time to really get comfortable with that Red Bull. I think that, you know, with them bringing upgrades, and I think he's going to just hit the ground running. He's one of the drivers that he's done well around Miami as well before. So yeah, I think Max Verstappen on that Friday, I think he's just going to hit the ground running and pick up sprint pole.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few tracks on the calendar where you just say, yeah, that's one of Max's tracks. And Miami is definitely one of them, shown exceptional pace around there in the past, particularly in a racing setting as well. So I'm saying Max Verstappen for sprint pole, and I'm going to say he's going to win the sprint as well, because it is pretty difficult to overtake around Miami, and I feel like once Max is out in front, it is difficult to topple him. Amy's having some technical issues, but we have got her on the line, thankfully. So, Amy, who is your sprint pole prediction?
I'm going to go for Oscar Piastri. I think he's just on a roll at the minute. I mean, he is definitely the most on-form driver on the whole grid at the minute, and especially in a sprint race, he is just different gravy. I mean, I think he's better than Norris when it comes to sprints. I think he doesn't have to think too strategically when it comes to tyres, and he can just race full speed. And I think that's maybe when he has to look after the tyres, that's maybe is his downfall at times. So to be able to just go full on the pace, especially in that McLaren, you can't count him out. So I'm going to go for Oscar Piastri.
And will he convert that sprint pole into a sprint win?
I think so, yes. I think in sprints, it's very rare you see any overtakes, especially at the top of the field. So, yeah, he's going to win that as well.
Seb, are we going to go 3 for 3 on sprint pole to sprint win conversions?
Yeah, definitely. I think if it is the case that Max gets pole, I don't think there's any world in which you could see him getting past. Obviously, he got past last weekend in Saudi Arabia, but I think obviously Miami's a little bit different, a little bit easier to defend into turn one. So yeah, I think that Max, as soon as he gets clear out, I think he'll be absolutely fine.
Max has developed that party piece as well, properly mastering the skill of being able to get a really good launch off the line at the start of races, proving to be the difference maker, I would say, in a lot of cases in terms of bridging that gap to McLaren, the initial pace that Verstappen has in the earlier parts of the race. But let's move away from the sprint part of the weekend now and on to the actual juicy bit. Let's talk about our pole position predictions. Amy, we'll start with you.
Well, who won the race last year? Lando Norris. And this is his race. I mean, I'm going to be able to see it in person this time, and he's going to go and put it on pole. I think last week in Saudi, we had him a sure thing as pole position, and I think it's going to be the same again. It's that same meaning to it. You know, he's not leading the championship anymore. It's Oscar. He's got a point to prove, and I think he'll prove it. And especially nowhere better to do it than where he won his first race. So Lando Norris.
Seb, will Lando recreate some of last year's magic, or are you going to say somebody else?
I'm going to go for Lando as well. I think that being chasing instead of being the chased, I think is going to suit Lando this year. I think that if Piastri does, I mean, obviously he's got a little bit of an advantage now, and I think that Norris now, I think a little bit more pressure is going to start to build on Piastri, where it almost becomes real for him that yes, he could actually win the championship this year, and yes, he's dealt with a lot of pressure before in the past really well. But I think this is a completely different ball game, and I think that Norris, with a little bit of a weight off his shoulders, I think that he's going to be quite comfortable, and I think he'll pick up pole. I think that as well, just learning from what he can do in sprint qualifying, and it hasn't been the strongest in sprints, Norris. So I think that he'll just maybe, if he doesn't have the greatest of performances, like he'll just use it to learn as much as he can, and then get comfortable for qualifying on the Saturday. And I think his one lap pace is, at times, it's absolutely incredible. So I think that, yeah, Lando Norris for pole.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be one of the McLarens on pole for the Sunday's race. I just feel as though it's so hard to decide between the two at the moment. I would say, I mean, obviously Piastri is the driver in better form. He looks to be the quicker driver at the moment. But you can't count out Lando Norris, especially when he has a huge point to prove like this. He has an incentive to go and chase Piastri down in the Drivers' Championship hunt. So I'm going to say Oscar Piastri, basically, because I just want to do something a little bit different. You both said Norris, and it's needless to say, Piastri is definitely a contender for that pole position spot. But just because that one of the McLaren drivers could finish on pole position doesn't necessarily make them the star of qualifying. We've got this separate prediction category now to give some love to other people up and down the grid. Seb, we'll start with you. Who is your star of qualifying?
I'm going to go for someone who's struggled a little bit in recent weeks. I'm going to go for Lewis Hamilton. I think that it's a little bit of a vibes-based prediction, to be honest. I think that Lewis, he's shown at times that he can get there with Ferrari. We saw that in the sprint in China. So I think he'll do well this weekend. I think he could maybe do a little bit better once again in the sprint rather than actual qualifying. But I do think that when it comes to actual qualifying, if he can do well in the sprint qualifying, he can learn from that, get some confidence under his belt. And I think that sprint weekends are going to suit him quite well. So when it comes to qualifying, I think he'll out-qualify Leclerc and maybe get somewhere in the top 4. So I think that, Lewis Hamilton's going to be my star of qualifying.
Yeah, I mean, if Shanghai is anything to go off, then, the sprint weekend could be a little bit better for Lewis Hamilton in comparison to how the rest of it has gone for him in what has been a pretty turbulent start to life in Ferrari. Amy, who are you saying to be your start of quali?
There's not much logic around this. Yuki Tsunoda, I just think he's growing in that Red Bull. He's not really put a foot wrong yet in it. I just think, actually, didn't he crash? Yeah, I'll go for Yuki Tsunoda. No, I think for Yuki, I'm going with that because I just rate him in that Red Bull. I think as he grows into it, he's got more to prove. And we spoke about him before, how much of a journey he's come on in Formula One. And now he's got a chance to prove it. And I just think Miami, what a weekend to do it, sunny. And it's pretty boring. So I just think he's going to have a great... I don't know what I'm saying. I don't really know.
It's pretty boring.
It's sunny. It's sunny. It's going to be... Yeah, fingers crossed the performance for Tsunoda to write home about. I mean, we always like a vibey prediction here on ShefF1. I've gone with old Charlie Leclerc to be the star of qualifying. I just think that he's shown really exceptional pace around Miami in the past. It seems to be a track that suits his style down to the ground, especially around one lap. And that Ferrari, I mean, it doesn't look to be the quickest car, but in the hands of Charles Leclerc, not as terrible as you may think. So I just feel as though in qualifying it'll be another P3, P4 kind of position for Leclerc. Maybe even break into that front row, but we'll just have to wait and see on that one. Now let's sort of slander the drivers a little bit and try and establish who the flop of qualifying is going to be. Amy, we'll start with you.
Again, not much logic, but can it really get worse for Liam Lawson? It can.
It can.
I'm backing another Liam flop, and that is literally just because I want to get some points and carry on with my lead. And he's been a pretty sure thing for this. So a flop's hard. He has to be. It's hard, especially last week because he did out qualify Isaac Hadjar. But I just really rate Isaac Hadjar, and I think I just think he's going to be out-qualified by his rookie teammate once again, and in my eyes, that is a flop.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, you could just predict anyone and more than likely get it right with your track record at the moment this season. So, I mean, no matter how vibey the prediction is, I think you watching should listen to Amy Hammersley because she's probably correct, as stats have proven. Seb, who is your flop of quali?
Well, last time out in Jeddah, I really backed Haas to do well, and they were awful. So I'm not backing them this time. I'm going to go for Ollie Behrman. My thinking behind this one is it seems to be the case at Haas that every weekend they alternate between who sort of gets their own real say on how the car is set up for the weekend, between Ocon and Behrman. One weekend Ocon's miles ahead of Behrman, the next weekend Behrman's miles ahead of Ocon, and last time out Behrman was miles ahead of Ocon, so I'm thinking maybe this time Ocon will be miles ahead of Behrman. So yeah, I'm not quite sure if that's how it's working. It seems to be a little bit of that. So I think that this weekend Ocon gets the sort of the priority at the team, and so Behrman will struggle because they don't really seem to be on the same wavelength, those two. So yeah, I'm going to go for Behrman as my flop.
Yeah, Haas sort of have returned to that slightly chaotic approach of just one driver being extremely quick one weekend while the other sort of is a little bit more obscure. I mean, they had a decent showing a couple of races ago in... oh my goodness, which race was it? I've just completely fallen flat on my face there. It was Bahrain, wasn't it? Where they both picked up some double points action. And I feel as though, yeah, we saw that a lot with K-Mag and Hulkenberg, apart from maybe in that last season. We saw that certainly with Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin, despite the fact that they both finished P19 and P20 every single race. But then, when Magnussen returned, he was miles ahead of Schumacher as well. So yeah, definitely a little bit of chaos down at Haas. And I'm not helping things because I'm saying Esteban Ocon is going to be the flop of the qualifying session. I just feel as though qualifying has been something Ocon has seen difficulty with this season, not once breaking into Q3, getting pretty close at one point, but I think was it Saudi where he finished P11 in qualifying, something like that, or it could have been a different race. But yeah, he hasn't made it into Q3 yet, and I just think it could be just another forgettable Esteban Ocon qualifying performance. I mean, that's quite concerning that a lot of what we've had to say will just be a forgettable weekend for some people. It says a lot about this season so far. But yeah, Esteban Ocon to be my flop of quali. Simple as that. Let's move on to Sunday now properly and go through our podium predictions. Seb, we'll start with you.
So P3, I'm going for Max Verstappen. I do think that even though he'll get that sprint victory, I think that once McLaren have had more time to adjust their setup, come out of Parc Fermé, I think that they'll be the ones that once again lead the pack, and I think it's going to be McLaren 1-2, Piastri P2, and Norris P1. Norris on pole. I think that if he gets a good start, I can't see any way that he'll be overtaken by Piastri. He won here last year. That should bring him confidence, some good memories. I'm sure he's going to do some sort of a lot of press stuff this weekend, looking back on his first victory, and I think that I think that's going to help him this weekend. And as I said before, I think the sort of weight off his shoulders of not being the championship leader and actually, being the one to chase Piastri, I think that will help him. But I still think Piastri is going to have an okay weekend. I think he'll still be decent. And I still think the McLaren are just going to be quick enough to hold off those behind. So yeah, I'll go Verstappen P3, Piastri P2, and Norris P1.
Amy, what about you? Another McLaren 1-2, on the cards, or are you saying something a little bit different?
I'm going to go with something a little different. I think we spoke about how Oscar is now the one not chasing, and could that interrupt, I guess, his mentality here. put him in. I'm putting him in third. I think he'll still get on the podium. I think the car and the driver combination is too strong to drop off that much. But yeah, I just feel like a mess up potentially in quali could lead to a few positions dropped. Leclerc, I'm going for P2. I think Ferrari looked great last race with the upgrades. Well, more so Charles Leclerc. And therefore, I want to put him on my podium once again. Picked up his first podium of the season last race. And I think he'll grow on that. And I think Miami, he's always on the podium. So, yeah, I'm putting him on my podium. And then, of course, I'm going with Lando Norris first. He's going to get pole and he's going to convert it into a win. And I think that will mean a lot for him to do with the championship. And yeah, as Seb said, it'd be beautiful well, he didn't say this in his words, but he said how he won here last year, and I personally think it would be just beautiful to see 2 races in a row in Miami.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful.
Absolutely beautiful.
It's sunny. That's what we'd love to see.
I too have gone with the McLaren 1-2, thus activating the opportunity to pick them as the best team. But we'll find out in a few moments' time whether Seb or myself will choose to activate that right. I'm saying Norris P1, Piastri P2, and Leclerc P3. Basically everything that's been said already about those 2 drivers, I echo the thoughts completely. I feel as though once McLaren are up there in that position, it's going to be very hard to topple either driver. And I think Leclerc will just be able to maintain that pace. I think the only one that could really stop him from clinching that final spot on the podium could be Max Verstappen. And I think Mercedes will be a little bit further back from Ferrari and McLaren and even Red Bull this weekend. So, yeah, I think Leclerc could sneak onto that podium pretty nicely. But, yeah, Norris to win, Piastri P2, and this driver's world title fight is wide open once again. What about driver of the day, though? I mean, Amy, who are you picking?
I've got to go with Lando Norris. I think it'd be such a comeback for him mentally, for the championship, to give him some points. And I think, I personally, obviously, imagining this, but I think it'll be a perfect drive from him, to be honest. I think if he can get that pole position and he's out front with clean air, I can't see much going wrong for him in that McLaren, especially this year. So, yeah, Lando Norris, my driver of the day.
Yeah, I'm going to say Lando for my driver of the day too. I just feel like it'll be a really, really nice win for him, whether it's a sort of dominating drive where he's got 10 seconds between himself and Piastri, or he manages to hold off what looks to be a pretty unstoppable force in the form of the regen of Kimi Raikkonen that we are seeing with Oscar Piastri at the moment. I feel as though you brought up briefly just Piastri's mentality in this title fight a little bit earlier. I feel as though he won't be affected by having the sort of being the hunted mindset. I feel like once he's out front now, we've seen it how he's done in junior categories. As soon as he's sort of top of those championships, it does look pretty hard to try and take him off that top step. And I feel as though he's just a much more under control driver when it comes to his emotions and stuff like that. Doesn't show anything on track either. So I feel as though Piastri, now that he's out in front, I think it could be very, very difficult to move him from that top spot. Seb, who's your driver of the day prediction?
I'm going to go for Max Verstappen. I think that even though I predicted him to win the sprint and obviously be on sprint pole as well, I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult for them when it comes to actual qualifying, actual race. I do think that the likes of Ferrari, Mercedes, they'll be able to catch up. And I think that maybe Max might start a little bit lower down the grid once again. I think that he'd have to fight through the pack. And I still think he believes he can still win this world championship and I think that in order to keep himself, within, a reasonable gap of Norris and Piastri, he's going to be absolutely fighting the wheels of the car and he's going to be pushing through. And I think that it'll be a really good drive from Max Verstappen, better than the car should be. And I think that if he can get onto the podium in that Red Bull once again and keep himself in that title fight, I think he's driver of the day.
I mean, do you both think Max still has a chance in this title fight? Sort of yes or no?
Yeah, I think he does. Absolutely. I think that Red Bull seem to... A lot of what's come out is that Red Bull are actually going to prioritise this season in terms of development, which a lot of teams aren't doing. But I think from a case of view, if you think of Verstappen potentially having that sort of release clause or break clause in his contract, that if Red Bull are miles off by the end of the season, this season, then he could leave. Whereas if, Red Bull get it together, put some good upgrades on the car and he is fighting once again for the World Championship, I think from just a short-term point of view, I think he's going to still have more trust in that team. And I think Red Bull knows that. So I think they're going to put quite a lot into this year. And also, it doesn't quite seem like next year their development of that engine seems a little bit all over the place. So I think that actually this is probably one of their best shots to win another World Championship is by prioritising this year, and also probably one of their best shots to keep Max.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right there. I mean, with Max, it's a case of the team have until Spa to make sure that he is within the top 3, top 2, I think, in the World Drivers' Championship standings. And then if Max does fall out of that fight, then he is allowed to negotiate with other teams for 2026 and beyond. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Red Bull should put all their eggs into this basket for this season. And maybe we'll see a bit of a reverse, McLaren having the quicker car to begin this season, but maybe by the second half of the season, Red Bull do come back swinging. Amy, who have you said to be your flop of the race?
I've gone with Max Verstappen.
There we go.
Yeah. Again, no really reason, because Max Verstappen is that driver who, will always come out and prove you wrong. However, he actually had a struggle, even though he finished second last year. But not that would necessarily happen again. But I went with it last week that he was gonna flop, and I don't know. I feel like there's growing frustrations within the team, and I feel like maybe that could lead to, maybe not a mistake of his own, but just something happening where it is a bit of a flop for Max. And you know what? I hope not for him, because I actually really want him to do well, because I don't like Red Bull. However, I like Max Verstappen here, with what's going on, and to just kind of keep proving everyone wrong. Everyone's saying that the McLarens are just way out of the league, out of everyone's league. But Max Verstappen put it on pole last weekend, and showed exactly the sort of driver he is. So, yeah, but I'm still going to go for a flop, just because it'll make things interesting.
That might be one of those sort of most weirdly emotional predictions I've ever heard on ShefF1 so far. That was
a bit of an oxymoron.
A lot of confliction there, but I like it. I like it a lot. Seb, who's your flop of the race for Miami?
I'm going to go for Alex Albon. I think now is the time where we're going to see Carlos Sainz coming into his own at Williams. Last time out in Jeddah, I think he was quite clearly faster than Albon. Even in the race, he was having to back off quite a lot to be able to give Albon DRS. You were looking at their team radios, and Albon was like, he's going too quickly. So I think that now is the time that Sainz is going to start to prove that he is just slightly a cut above Albon. And I think that it's just the gap between them is going to be at times quite big, and I think that this weekend, I don't think it's going to be massive, but I think that Albon is just going to be not on the same level as Carlos Sainz this weekend, and I think that Sainz has got a bit of confidence about him now, a bit of momentum, starting to prove to the team why they should trust him, and I think that Albon maybe could get in his own head a little bit about that, maybe try and push a little bit too hard to prove, no, I am still the team leader here. And maybe we could see a couple of errors creep in. So he's going to be my flop of the race.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a pretty underwhelming and sort of nowhere near as impactful a start to life at Williams for Carlos Sainz, like many predicted. Although, yes, you're right. He is certainly looking to be getting to grips more and more with that car. It's not been helped by how strong a start Albon has had, but Miami could be definitely a very viable turning point for the Spaniard. I've said George Russell. I mean, like you said before, Amy, it's really hard to pick these flop of the weekend predictions now, because we can't even bank on drivers like Lance Stroll like we have done in the past. I mean, Checo's off the grid now. He was a sort of flop of the weekend favourite. But yeah, I mean, Stroll sits 10th in the Drivers' Championship, so how can I predict him as a flop of the race for the time being? So I'm going to say George Russell, on the grounds that, like I have been doing with a lot of my flop predictions this season, it won't be a terrible race weekend for George Russell, but I think it's about time that Antonelli finishes above him in a race, and I feel as though Miami could be the place where that happens. Often throws sort of really, really minor curveballs, and so I feel like that could be one of them. And he's just shown remarkable consistency throughout this season, and I think he's overdue a flop weekend, I would say, just like any driver would be, because he has been so solid. And I think it's just a matter of time before any driver sort of lets a mistake creep in, especially considering that Mercedes isn't exactly the perfect car, nor is it particularly quick around Miami either. So I feel as though that aggressive driving style from Antonelli could be what puts him ahead of Russell, and to have a bit of a weekend to forget. Let's move on to the teams now. Now, none of us have opted to go for the McLaren 1-2 best team prediction. Amy, that is a common favourite of yours, so who have you said instead?
Yeah, no, obviously I normally go for it, but it hasn't been working the last few weeks, so I thought I'd go for a little something different. Ferrari, like I said, Charles Leclerc looked really strong last weekend. I thought. I mean, obviously picking up his first podium, and I think they're going to have some information. They're going into Imola, which is obviously a race they always like to have upgrades for. Um, and grow the car. And I feel like it's always quite an optimum position, the Ferrari car. So obviously that's the next race. I think Miami's going to probably be the best time for them to understand the car a little more before going into it. I think Lewis Hamilton probably would understand it a bit more. So I think they're going to be both up to grips with things. And yeah, I think Ferrari will be on it. And I love that new race suit for this weekend. Bit of blue.
What about the livery, though? Have you seen the livery?
I haven't seen the livery.
Oh, it's horrific. Don't look at it.
It's an eyesore. It's not great. We've had a few liveries come in this weekend. I mean, RB once again have absolutely smashed it. I mean, these are absolutely pointless. But it's nice to see a bit of a change. But if you just if you want to have a look at that livery now, you're seeing it now.
Yeah, I'm not happy. That's made me sad. That's made me really sad. And the picture I've got up has got the front as the red with 16 and the back is 44 with the blue and white. And it just really confused me, the two different numbers there. But no, I like the race suits, I'll say that.
Yeah, no, I think safe to say they haven't exactly replicated things with that livery. Seb, who are you saying to be your best team of this weekend?
I'm going to go for Red Bull, even though it sort of contradicts what I said about Verstappen out-driving the car to get driver of the day. That would suggest that Yuki isn't going to do that well. But do you know what? I think Yuki will do okay as well. I think that Verstappen, if he can manage to get on the podium, Yuki maybe gets in the top 6. I think that with maybe other teams potentially having a little bit of chaos potentially, and you never know with Norris and Piastri fighting on track, you never know what could happen there. And then Mercedes, we have no idea, to be honest, with Mercedes. They could come this weekend and be absolutely incredible. Same with Ferrari. I think Ferrari and Mercedes are in very similar positions where, even though Mercedes have actually been quite consistent this year in terms of just constantly being 5th and 6th, you do feel like at times they do have the pace to compete right at the top, at the sharp end, especially in the hands of Russell. But then sometimes Russell's nowhere near them. So it's... yeah, Mercedes, Ferrari, you have no idea how they're going to turn up. And then Red Bull, I feel like they also are a little bit in that category as well. But I think Red Bull will turn up a little bit this weekend. And so, yeah, I'm going to go for Red Bull, even though I don't think I've really said anything there that would suggest that they will be. But yeah, I'm going to go for Red Bull.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, I get where you're coming from, albeit a little bit like Amy's sort of flop prediction for Verstappen. It's a difficult one to call again for best team. To be honest, I'm kind of tempted to change mine because I do see a McLaren 1-2 on the horizon, sort of a bit of a gimme point for the McLaren best team prediction. But I feel as though another really solid team to predict for this weekend is Williams. I feel as though Sainz could be quicker than Albon, but I feel as though that Albon, this momentum won't stop just yet. I feel as though it could be both drivers finishing anywhere between P7 and P10. Just a nice double points haul for Williams this weekend, just to build on some momentum that they so desperately need to be that sort of staple within the midfield. And I just think, yeah, it's a more of a cert than a Red Bull podium and P6 and above. I think it's more of a cert than Ferrari getting a podium and the Hamilton decent result alongside Leclerc. And I think Red Bull, yeah, very hard to predict. Mercedes, very hard to predict. So I'm just going to go with a solid midfield performance from Williams. Now, let's move on to our final predictions, which, of course, are the shock predictions for this weekend. These ones have varying amounts of points up for grabs, depending on how shocking they are. Amy, let's start off with you.
Yeah, so I'm going for a double Ferrari podium in the sprint or the race. For me, like I said, I'm back in Ferrari this weekend. Like Seb also said, I think there could be space opened up on this podium because I think that Norris-Piastri battle on track is going to come sooner rather than later. And I don't know whether it'll happen here, but I think it'll be very soon. We'll see that. So neither of the McLarens could be on the podium, making room for Lewis Hamilton. And then to speak about Lewis Hamilton, where I obviously said Leclerc looked great last weekend, Lewis might hopefully be up to grips. Well, it is a sprint weekend, and he did win the sprint in China. So I feel like maybe he enjoys a sprint. It'll be interesting to see how well he does in the sprint compared to maybe the race. And just where that car is, I guess, for Lewis Hamilton. Is he starting to understand it? And I feel like it could be the perfect weekend, double chance as well, to see a double Ferrari podium.
Okay, interesting you've said that because I am going to go with a bit of a negative one for Ferrari. I'm going to say Hamilton will miss out on either SQ3 or Q3. So not exactly the most sort of shocking prediction, as it were. But I mean, Hamilton definitely has struggled getting to grips with this Ferrari this season so far. But I mean, I can also see it being a turning point. I did struggle to pick out a shot prediction for Miami, considering it is the most boring race on the calendar. So yeah, a shot prediction for that is a little bit difficult. So yeah, I'm just going to say Hamilton missing out on either SQ3 or Q3. Could be a mistake, could be a misjudgment. He just won't end up in one of them, basically. That's all I can say for that. Seb, have you got a more positive prediction to round out things?
Yeah, I'm going to go for Yuki Tsunoda with a top 3 in qualifying or sprint qualifying. I'm also going to utilise that, the fact it's a sprint weekend, so we can sort of basically double our chances of it. But Yuki, I think he's done well around Miami before. I think last year he got double points. I think he got points in the sprint and in actual race, even though I think obviously Ricciardo did come P4 in that sprint and he wasn't quite able to match that. But I think that, yeah, he's done well around Miami before. And as Amy said before, that he is slowly getting to grips with the car. Week on weekend, he's getting a little bit better. It was okay in Jeddah. He's still quite a long way off Max when it comes to qualifying. He was, I think, 9 tenths off in Q3 in Jeddah, and before that he was, I think similar in Bahrain. So he's not quite there in qualifying yet, especially compared to Max. But that's why this is going to be a shock prediction. I think that obviously the car potentially, I would predict Max to get in the top 3 in either one of those two as well. So I think the car can do it. I think it's just about whether Yuki can put it together. And I think that bit by bit, he had some more testing at Silverstone in the Red Bull, so just gradually getting more used to the car bit by bit. And I think that, I wouldn't be too shocked if he was able to put in one great lapping in SQ3 or Q3. And I hope that he can do it.
Perfect. Well, that's exactly what the shot predictions are for. Before we close things out, let's just catch up on how many points each of us are on. So, approaching round number 6, of course, not Jeddah, sorry. I'll try that again. Okay, so before we round out things completely with our predictions, let's just delve into how many points we all sit on in this sort of predictions championship we've got going on. We've got Amy miles out in front, sitting very pretty on 18 points. I've got 10 and Seb is on 8. So, I mean, not exactly all to play for, but it's still very early days in the season, and we've got a very boring Miami Grand Prix coming your way next week. So if you want to miss the race, can't blame you. But stick around next week on the ShefF1 channel where we will rant about it entirely. And with another race review and reaction to that. And that's about it. I think that's pretty much all we've got time for in terms of Miami. And join us next week when we inevitably chat so much BS about it. And it should be a good one. Thanks to Seb and Amy for joining me once again. And we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Bye.